I hope you're enjoying our walk through 1st and 2nd Samuel this summer. And I wanted to create just a little understanding between the book of Judges and the book of 1st Samuel, especially as it relates to the Philistines. So when we make our trip to Israel, there is a place in the Shvelah, the agricultural area, one of the valleys in the Shvelah. There's a tell called Bet Shemesh. It's a tell is a mound or a hill, looks like a hill, but it's actually layers of civilization built upon one another. And when you count the civilizations, you count from the top layer and go down. So the bigger the number, the older the civilization. Now bear with me, this will make sense in just a minute. At level 5 at Bet Shemesh, there is a civilization, a city there that is entirely Philistine. Philistine pottery, Philistine construction, Philistine bones, which means the dietary issues. There were all kinds of pork bones, which tells you they ate lots and lots of pork. And so this is an entirely Philistine layer. When we go to layer number 4, it's still Philistine construction, but now we begin to see Jewish pottery mixing in along with Philistine pottery. But the biggest change is that the diet changes. Now there are almost no pig bones. Now remember, the Jews weren't allowed to eat pork. So what's that tell us? Well, it tells us that there began to be a melding of cultures, that the Philistines, who were enemies of the Israelites, and the Israelites themselves began to blend together. And now the Jews, the Israelites, are living in this Philistine community. Now, the reason that's important is because we know from the book of Samuel, when we get to the story of Samson, beginning in Judges chapter 13, that it tells us that the Philistines really were dominating the Israelites. The Israelites were terrified of the Philistines. And if you remember, any time that Samson did something, there are 5 episodes in the book of Judges regarding Samson. 4 of them, the Israelites freak out and they try to tell Samson, "What are you doing? Stop this. Don't you know that the Philistines will destroy us?" Well, here's the thing. In Judges 13, verse 5, it says, when it talks about and predicts the fact that Samson's going to be born, it not only talks about him being a Nazirite from birth, but it also says that he is going to begin the delivery, the freedom of the Israelites from the Philistines. So we move through the story, we get through the end of Samson's life, and we know that he's captured in that very dramatic story about Delilah, and he's blinded, his hair is cut, and he's put to a grinding wheel, and he's brought into this big stadium for all of the military leaders, the political leaders, the who's who of the Philistine culture. They were all gathered in this area to watch their hated enemy, Samson. Because remember, he tormented the Philistines. He created all kinds of havoc. He was the face on the most wanted poster among the Philistines. And then he's there in that stadium, and you remember, he pushes the pillars and it collapses. And it tells us that all of the rulers of the Philistines were killed on that day. Now, what does it mean then that God is beginning the deliverance of the Israelites from the Philistines? Well, the Israelites were beginning to blend into the Philistine culture. They were beginning to assimilate into their enemies, because the fact of the matter is, at that moment in time, the Israelites thought that the Philistines were absolutely unbeatable. They had weapons that caused them to even be a huge threat in Egypt. And so what chance did the Israelites have? So there's this mentality, we better just join them rather than fighting against them. But God used Samson to create such animosity, such hatred among the Philistines toward the Israelites, that there was no way things were going back to the way they were. There was no blending of cultures that was ever going to happen. But there's one more thing. While the Philistines aren't defeated by Samson's act, can you imagine how word spread about all of the military leaders, all of the generals, all of the political leaders, all of the priests, all of the who's who of that culture were killed by Samson in one fell swoop. Can you imagine how that would begin to create hope among the Israelites? And so we get to 1 Samuel chapter 4, and we have that story that seems a little out of place, but it's a story that probably happens 20 to 50 years after Samson kills all of those Philistines. And the Israelites decide they're going to go after the Philistines. But they're resoundingly defeated. It tells us that about 4,000 Israelites lost their life that day. And so they decide, what are we going to do? What they should have done is called for Samuel. What they didn't do is call for Samuel. They sent for the Ark of the Covenant. And that's when they send the Ark into battle. The Ark is captured and it goes on its evangelical tour. And that's an amazing story all on its own. That's when Hophni and Phinehas and Eli all die. But that beginning that comes to culmination in 2 Samuel chapter 8, when David finally defeats and subdues the Philistine, that all began with Samson, who in Judges 13:5, God says this boy will be a Nazirite from birth, and he will begin the deliverance of Israel from the Philistines.